It is the end of the life of a legend of broadcasting, Vincent Edward Scully. If you haven't heard yet, and maybe not, the news coming down a few hours ago, Vin Scully has passed away. He's died at the age of 94, the golden voice of baseball. 67 seasons this guy was the soundtrack of Dodger baseball on the radio and television and all of the above from 1950 to 2016. But he was not just a baseball broadcaster. He also called college football games, NFL games, big events. He was the face of American sportscasting for a large chunk of his life and likely your life, depending how old you are, and my life. He was the bridge from the Brooklyn Dodgers to the LA Dodgers. Called 8 seasons, not just 1 or 2, and then the team left for the West Coast. Vin Scully was in the borough of Brooklyn for 8 years, calling baseball games for that franchise, and then he moved out to Los Angeles when the team moved to L.A. in 1958. 25 World Series, bunch of no-hitters. I think the number was 20, all-star games, you name it. And so we're going to take a few minutes. This is going to be really the whole hour. It's the hour of Vin Scully. We will have a 6-line tribute coming up later, the highest honor we can give someone in the world of radio, the 6-line salute. We will do that to Vin Scully. When someone touches our lives, makes a big impact, we give them the highest honor. The last couple times we've done the 6-line tribute, it has been for people that have called the show. Beer Drinking Brian, who passed away back in February. We had our friend who does the Fly Mallor Fly song, Philly Rob. He passed away not that long ago either. But we'll do it for Vin Scully later this hour. It's the right thing to do. So let us discuss the life and times of the legendary broadcaster for the Dodgers, Vin Scully. So the question, what are you going to remember about Vin Scully? And I've got relatability, bread, and cosmic accident. And we'll mix all of this into the stew. And we're going to enjoy the stew. So to lead off, as you may or may not know, I'm not making this all about me because it's not about me. But growing up in Southern California, watching Vin Scully, I wanted to be Vin Scully. I was fortunate enough to know him a little bit. I got a gig in radio at a very young age, and one of the beats I was on when I was working at the station in San Diego, it was a mega station, super station, the Mighty 690. So I started out at a very young age. I was a teenager, and I found myself in the press box at Dodger Stadium, and then a few years after that, I briefly had the job that my friend David Vassay has today in L.A., Dodger Talk host. I got to do that for a little bit. And just a coincidence being in that situation and being in that environment, I had a chance to know Mr. Scully casually, and a few things that stand out. And these are things that other people are going to say. And the one thing about Vin is that everyone wanted to kind of hang out with him. Anybody in the media, all the media freeloaders wanted to hang out with him, and he was very polite to everyone. And so the kindness and the relatability is the way I would say that. Obviously, there's reliability as a broadcaster, but the relatability. And debonair, very friendly, endearing, eloquent. People talk about the wordsmith Vin Scully. But also the fact that he was able to tell stories on the radio and television with such brevity to be able to get them in. And he had this great internal clock. It's like a quarterback. We talk about quarterbacks having to have a clock and anticipate when the pass rush is going to get to them or when the receiver is going to get open, and you have to make the play. Well, as a broadcaster, when you're doing baseball, you might have an unbelievably huge amount of time to tell a story. You might not have any time at all, depending on how many outs happen in a quick amount of time. For example, your batter's up, you're telling a story about the guy who's batting, and then he swings at the first pitch and pops up, and the at-bat's over, and then the next batter comes up. And so if you're telling a story about that guy, you got to know how to get it all in. But he also knew how to let the game breathe, the difference between the nuance of radio and television, calling a game on the radio as opposed to television. And these are all qualities that if you're around broadcasting or you just are a fan of it, how the art is done of verbal communication, you appreciate that. And also just on a personal level, the fact that Vin could have absolutely big-time me, could have spit a loogie right in my face and treated me like a pissant if he wanted to. I mean, he didn't have to be nice to me at all. He was the golden voice of baseball, but none of that happened. And he was very beyond kind over the years. And I first met him when I was roughly 19 years old. I was a kid. And he had already at that point been the voice of the Dodgers for 44 years. So double my entire life at that point. He was already the voice of the Dodgers. And he was very kind over the years. Always say hello and how you doing, Ben, and things like that, which I always appreciated. Now, furthermore, are there any specific stories that stand out? Absolutely. Of course, everyone's got stories. I got stories. You got stories. Life's all about the stories that you pick up along the way. I've used that phrase for many years. I believe that to be true because it really ultimately is all you have, right? The stories that you pick up along the way, the people you meet. It's like Dr. Seuss, the old Dr. Seuss book coming to life. But so many stories. I don't have time to get into them all here. So we're just going to scratch the surface, okay? We're just going to scratch the surface, and bear with me. Some of these things I haven't really thought about in a long time, but there's one road trip in particular that stands out. And this is when I was briefly doing the postgame stuff with the Dodgers, and the team was in New York playing the Mets. And this is at Shea Stadium, that dump in Queens. And so think of this, we're going way back in the hot tub time machine to the mid-1990s. So this is a long time ago. Mid to late 1990s. The Mets at that time were pretty terrible. They were pretty bad. I think they had Todd Hundley and like Rico Bronya were their top guys. The Dodgers, that was not a good Mets team. The Dodgers were pretty average. Right? They were not. I mean, they had Piazza and Karros and guys like that, but they were not particularly great. Not that any of that matters, because it doesn't really matter. But the thing I remember about that was right at the team hotel. They stayed at a hotel at that time right next to Grand Central Station. And I remember there were a group of really old dudes, and I was a young guy at that time. Still am middle-aged now. But there were a group of guys outside the hotel wearing these frazzled Brooklyn Dodger jackets and hats. And I remember I was like, what are these guys? And it was a group of guys that had been in their 20s or early 30s when the Dodgers had left Brooklyn. And every time the team came back to New York, these guys would sit outside the hotel. And Vin knew who they were. He was aware of them because he worked for the team and all that. And it was like saying hello to those guys. And I remember seeing those guys. And, of course, I'm sure they're not around anymore. That was a long time ago. They were already old at that point. The other thing I remember about that, there's a couple of things. Breaking bread, right? Breaking bread with Vin. And occasionally I would chat with him in the press box and whatnot. But there was this one night in particular where it was Vin and a group of reporters, and it was prior to a game against the Mets. And Vin regaled us with stories. And he didn't talk about baseball per se. In fact, I don't remember him mentioning anything about baseball. But he told stories, because it was in New York, he told stories about growing up in Manhattan back in it had to be probably the late 30s, the mid 40s. This is a whole different world. And he had told one story very vividly about a sanitation strike. The trash men of New York had gone on strike, and things had gotten so bad. Vin told, he very vividly recalled this story when he was a kid. It was around Christmas, so it was cold in New York and all that, and people were desperately trying to get rid of their trash. And so at the same time, back in that era, televisions were becoming a thing, and they had these huge, massive televisions, right? Massive, giant TVs. So maybe it might have been the 1950s by this point, but there were huge TVs. And Vin said that they had these big boxes, these big tube TVs. And so he remembers people filling up these boxes and wrapping them with wrapping paper and putting bows on them. And it was a very vivid memory. And he said people would fill those boxes with rubbish So, and then somebody would come steal them. They'd leave them outside their doorstep, and people would come steal them. And that was a way people would get rid of their trash. I also recall one time it was very humid there, and the game. He didn't do the games on radio only the last probably 15, 20 years of his career. He only did TV games simulcast. But there was a game in New York where it was very humid. It was a getaway game. It was not on television. And I remember running into Vin, and he was wearing shorts, Dodger shorts, and a T-shirt that the team had given him. And I'd only seen Vin Scully in a suit and a tie. I'd never seen him, the provincial voice of baseball. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. He's like, he was just trying to stay cool because it was so nasty hot and all that. Another funny anecdote to the life of Vin Scully and how I kind of crossed paths with him a little bit. When I did have the gig and I briefly did some stuff on Dodger Talk, I mustered up the courage to ask Vin Scully if he enjoyed my work. I assumed, he calls the Dodger games on his... No. I assumed on the way home that he probably just listened to me break down the game, And in my head... Vin's driving home from the Dodger game, and he's got me on, some goofball kid breaking down the game. And he very politely, could not have been nicer. And he said, Ben, when I leave the ballpark, I like to listen to classical music. And, so he was listening to classical music, just a torpedo to the heart, but as nice as could be. I also recall... This happened at Dodger Stadium. I would get there real early, and a lot of the reporters would get there early. But I remember I was sitting in the press box, but Vin was in the next booth over. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon, and they'd have the news on, like the local news, and there was some scandal with someone at that time who was a big deal. It was really not a big deal anymore. This socialite named Paris Hilton, right? And some scandal with Paris Hilton. And it was the funniest thing because I remember Vin was talking about Paris Hilton, and I found that hilarious. But just an icon in broadcasting. And the last thing here, I'm going long, but as far as the record, will anyone break Vin Scully's record for sportscasting? Well, ever's a long time, right? And you say, will anyone ever break the record? Ever? You go on for infinity, assuming we're all still on this planet, some form of human beings. So the world would have to change dramatically for this to happen because Vin's career, in many ways, was a cosmic accident in a really good way, right? Everything lined up. He got the job at a young age. He kept the job, and he loved the job, and he wanted to keep doing the job. But I know for a fact, because I got told this story from him. Vin told me the story. When he was a young guy and he was interning, he had interned at a radio station in Washington, D.C. And if he had his wish, he was the second in line to be the voice of this radio station in Washington. And that was back when radio was the king, right? Television was not the king. The radio broadcaster was the king. And Vin had told the story about how he really wanted this job because that radio station was such an important station in D.C. that the broadcaster, the job he was up for, would introduce the president before a speech, like the State of the Union, whatever it might be. So, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. And that would have been Vin Scully's job. And that's the job that he wanted, like for the State of the Union, something like that. And he had mentioned that was the gig he wanted, and he talked about how his parents would have been so proud of him if he had gotten that job. Obviously, it didn't happen because he got an offer from Red Barber, who had been the legendary broadcaster in that day, to a sportscasting. You give it a try, right? Just give it a try. He gave it a try, and for the next 67 years or whatever it was, an unbreakable record. The age thing, and also just the age we're in right now, right? Where, as you know and I know, we all know, the money the top broadcasters get is insane. And so you don't have to do it. Now, Vin didn't have to do it. He made a lot of money the last 20 years of his career, particularly. And he was always making pretty good money at the network. But if you're making a ton of money now, the travel of working for a team, it's a pain in the ass, even with all the five-star hotels and all the limos and all that stuff. The other variable, there's a lot of them, but you've got the wokesters now who are monitoring everything you say, the word police. There have been more than a few broadcasters in recent years that have had lifetime gigs chopped down because they said the wrong thing at the wrong time and someone got offended and polite society had to muzzle them. And Vin didn't have to worry about that with social media and all that. And I also know he did not keep watching the Dodgers. Once he retired after the 2016 season. He did keep up with the team, but like every old guy, he kept up with the Dodgers by reading the LA Times and looking at the box scores and learning about the team that way, how they were doing. But rest in peace, Vin Scully.